From the Post Building in downtown North St. Louis, this is Inside City.
Well, hello. Here we are, finally. So welcome to Inside City. You know, we have been talking a lot about how to shift things a little bit, and I'm very happy to have these amazing humans here, our friends Evan and Caressa. So my name is Carlos Zamora, Chief Creative Officer at Cartel, which is a marketing firm specialized in design, brand culture, and inclusive development here at the Post Building. And this is one of the products that we created to talk about what's happening in St. Louis. We wanted to get insights from the evolution of downtown, the stories that we need to tell to basically build a better city, and just to bring people that are, shifting a little bit things here in St. Louis. So for the last 2 seasons, we've had 20 episodes with amazing people, and John Berglund has been the host. So for season 3, I'm happy that you guys say yes to my proposition of diversifying our pool of hosts. So I'll be taking care of brand development and brand culture. We're going to talk about. So basically, each of us will have their own lanes and your own guests for this podcast. And since I'm a designer and I love design, and we are makers of brands here, I was curious about the new emerging brands that are coming up in St. Louis. So think about Clementine's, Katie's Pizza, Brennan's, Global Furniture. Those names that are the new generations of iconic brands that are people who are making interesting things here from St. Louis. And a little bit just to provide a new lane for and a space to promote them beyond the legacy of brands that we already have, like the Imo's Pizza or Ted Drew's or the things that we know. So with that, I welcome you all. And why don't let's just introduce ourselves to our audience and see your names, what you're up to, what is your lane about, and what are the things that you guys will be doing moving forward. Ladies?
Rock, paper, scissors? No.
Ladies first.
Well, my name's Caressa Davis. I am a lifelong St. Louisan, and I love this city. I have gotten a chance to see the city from a variety of different perspectives. And through that, also, I went to school in Virginia at Hampton University, rocking the blue and white. But being on a national stage and being able to hear how people talk about our city, and both internally and externally, is something that has been fascinating to me. And I am one to believe that in order for our city to truly thrive, we have to change the way we talk about the city. As St. Louisans, we love to hate this place, but I want to see us get to a place where we love to love it. And so where I will focus is talking to the people that help control the narrative, again, both locally and on a national and international stage, who are the people that are shaping the narrative of what our city is and what it has to offer, and kind of diving into how they come up with that narrative. And also being able to recognize that in a lot of ways, St. Louis has a tale of two cities kind of experience going on, that if depending on where you are in the city and on any particular topic, you might have a different perspective on it than someone else that maybe is coming from the other side of that perspective. And so how can we bring those perspectives to the table, understanding that at the end of the day, we all want the city to thrive.
Absolutely.
We all want to move forward and see St. Louis become the best city that it can be. And I think we're all at this table because we believe in this city.
Absolutely.
And we know that our peers and colleagues and all these other people that we interact with, if you're still in the city at this point, you love this place and you want to see it thrive too. So how can we bring that conversation to the table and start talking good and talking about the good that's happening here?
Okay. What about you, Evan?
Yeah, I think that's great, the sentiment that you offered to us. My name is Evan Bronstein. I'm an artist, architect, educator. I think the interesting thing that Caressa brought up here is about the kind of lens, the perspective that we have, that we bring. And I'm originally from the Northeast. So I looked at St. Louis with a completely different kind of lens. Like if you're from the coast, a more urban kind of environment, when you come and look at St. Louis, there's a lot that it has to offer. Variety of different neighborhoods of various scales and so forth. And I was drawn in immediately. I mean, in particular, I came from Washington University, and then to see Forest Park in its foreground is just a tremendous.
Yeah, it's the number one park in America.
Yeah, it's one of these visual cues that you see it, and it's a European-styled park. So having had an opportunity to travel through Europe after I finished undergrad, coming to graduate school, the blinders come off. Even if you grow up in the Northeast, where you feel like this is kind of this melting pot, a classic environment where there's all kinds of perspectives coming together and having to live together, you still are wowed and amazed by what happens in other cultures and other environments. And so I feel like that's something that's always been a part of me as a part of my upbringing, but was a welcomed opportunity here. It's just a wonderful canvas upon which to think about the ways in which we can impact the built environment. So I immediately moved into the city after I graduated.
When did you come? For how long have you been here?
So I've been here over 30 years now.
30 years.
Yeah, 31 if I'm really technical.
Okay.
Came in
almost 20 on my end. And you're native.
Yeah, I've been here. We say if it's more than 10 years, you go here now.
Right, exactly.
Well, yeah, I don't know what to do now because I've lived here longer in Missouri than I lived in New Jersey.
You are St. Louisians.
Yeah, and my family, both my boys, they're St. Louis kids for sure. So the things that are of interest for me have a lot to do with design and critical thinking. So my day job, I'm a design principal at a global organization. And so this is one location from which we operate. And so I'm really interested in constantly, how do we communicate our ideas, right? In many respects, my headspace is constantly about thinking about a particular idea or concept and how to communicate it, how to leverage the different mediums that we have as vehicles, try to channel that energy into a solution that can be actionable.
What type of guests are you thinking about?
So I would like to have, one of the things that I would say first is that for me, design exists as a response to a demand for change.
Okay.
Right. So it's essentially where we are, whether you're an individual, an organization, or entity, and where you want to be, that delta, the difference, that aspirational difference, that's where design happens.
Okay.
Design exists as that scaffolding that makes that possible. And so when we had the conversation about expanding the lanes, I was thinking that it would be interesting to talk to individuals that represent organizations where design was that vehicle for their change. In many respects, there's a friction where in order to get to the next plateau, whether it's programming can expand or there's a variety of avenues that they want to communicate out to the community, design becomes that vehicle. And you have to sit down and talk to your board or talk to your organization about what do we need to do to make that shift. And the strategy that comes into play, the visual cues that help elaborate on that experience, all of those things are where design happens. So I would love to talk to organizations where they're poised to make change. The vulnerability that comes from saying where we are is not where we want to be, that moment when you're on the precipice of change, that's the most primal space. It's where you have to figure out what you're going to do, what your next move is going to be. And when they're at that place, at that moment, I want to engage with some organizations that are poised to make change. So we'll be talking to organizations that are in that place where they've reached their either physical limitations and they need to grow in a variety of different ways. But then on the bookend of that is to talk from a referential perspective and to talk to organizations that have already made change. What happened? How did they go through it? What helped them get to where they needed to be? And then what were the design vehicle or design components that got them there? And I think that bookend will be an interesting conversation because between the two of them, they'll have that frictional moment. And then once you reach that change, the interesting thing about design is that it becomes the vehicle for change, but then it ultimately becomes the evidence of change.
The evidence. I love that. Design as the evidence of change. Well, that's definitely the principles of design thinking. I love that you are coming with that from the architecture perspective. Versus me, which is I'm a graphic designer. So I'm all about identity, building belief systems, which is our what brands are. And then I love the fact that Caressa is bringing her perspective as a communications, like to see how the city speaks and what are the stereotypes that we have built over the years, and how are they evolving,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and how all of these identities that are being created through the build space, through branding, are they resonating? Is that how people are interacting with all of these different entities that make up our city? Are we all on the same page? Do we understand
Yeah.
it? And how are we talking about it?
The audience. What is the perspective of the audience?
Yeah. So I think it's cool how all of these pieces kind of melt together. I know we were talking, I was talking recently to someone over one of our major landmarks, and a space that they occupy. We'll get into it at some point, I think, during one of my sessions. But the space that they occupy, what it is dubbed and what we call it in industry, is not how most of the city recognizes this space. They don't know it by that same name. So in the space of branding, like, okay, well, maybe now we need to kind of address what the brand is and
the
how to
multiple
kind
St.
of
Louis cities inside of the St. Louis
exactly.
city. That I love that perspective, because every city is plural. You know, you are as many cities as individuals that you have, and St. Louis is increasingly growing and attracting international audiences. You know, and if you go to Tower Grove Park, I mean, you see how the population has exploded by bringing different nationalities coming together.
Yeah.
And I see, you know, I think the perception of St. Louis as a, you know, second city or a flyover city, you know, especially in the current climate, you know, we're going to see, I would like to see more like a magnet, attracting and retaining different, all sorts of cultures coming together to this beautiful urban space. We have one of the most beautiful downtowns in America. I mean, architecturally, you know, it's amazing. We're so close. We're right now at the Post Building, which is about 3 blocks from Washington Avenue. And I just love to see that urban core more active, more dynamic, as they are, you know, different organizations are working on that. So I want to shift a little bit to you know, who we are as individuals. You know, let's introduce ourselves, you know, the things we like, the things, you know, a little bit about our careers, you know, how things have evolved. You know, who wants to start on that? You know, talk about your childhood or something that the audience might be like, who are these guys anyway?
All right, I can start. I mean, I think, so like I mentioned earlier, I'm originally from the Northeast. So I was born in Long Island.
But how do you end up becoming an architect, you know?
Well,
what made it happen? What was
I couldn't
that for
sing
you?
or dance. So this architecture, this is the way. No, I think that for myself, it's part of the lane that I'm in, this critical thinking part. I always found myself in as an observer, looking and reflecting on my experiences and the world around me. So trying to make sense of that is part of the artist in me. You know, in many respects, and you actually volunteered this to me the first time we met, is that art is about expression and design is about communication. Yeah. And I felt like there was two sides of me. The artist in me was always trying to find opportunities to express myself and find a way that I might align with the culture or the environment within which I am. We all experience this as we're growing up. Elementary school and high school is a completely amazing experience to try to understand and navigate the world around you, both, you know, culturally and just where do you set on that continuum of society. And then the aspect of design is then trying to make sense of that and trying to find ways of communicating it. So for me, I arrived at architecture because it was the balance of those two mediums. The way that it provided an opportunity for expression, and also it had a rigor associated with it. You had to think critically about
craftsmanship,
what it was
too.
you're trying to. Sorry?
Yeah. Yes, this is a craftsmanship. It's a traditional.
100%. 100%. You're shaping the contours of a space as much as you are shaping the contours of the experience that someone has. And those two things, the tectonics of putting that together, if you'll allow that kind of architectural speak, and then the artistic expression of that, they work hand in hand. So for me, that was, I think, something that I felt early on, didn't have a way of articulating that was a path. So I thought, my dad liked cars. He was always in the garage working on cars, motorcycles. And I thought maybe automotive design would be that avenue, because it was heavy technical, but get your hands dirty, and it was crafts. It was an aspect of it was craft. But then when I, got into high school, this was still, they were teaching courses on drafting and drawing. So I took a drafting class and I was like, this is so cool. Like, when a lot of musicians talk about instruments sort of just making sense to them, and a pencil in my hand just made sense to me.
Right. No, it's
Like,
just
it's just-
having a pencil in your hand and being able to articulate your thoughts in a sketch. I think it's magical.
Yeah.
That's
And
a
as
real
soon
power.
as soon as I realized that there was a career called architecture, I was like, I want to find out about that. And so I picked colleges that offered that initially, and then I ended up at the University of Maryland. And there's all these foundational courses that you take. And there was art history, and there was like a survey course of architectural history. And when I sat in that audience of, this large lecture room, and I'm looking at these slides after slides, I was like, you just experience it more. And I was like, I want to find out more about that. And then it just evolved from there.
Yeah. So funny enough, I was supposed to be an architect. My father was an engineer. I studied in Cuba. I was born and raised in the island. And my dad his whole life, he had big plans for me to become an architect. And then what happened was in high school, I ended up in a radio station because someone was, there was a radio show for kind of kids, teenagers, that type of thing. But I took that very seriously. And so I was in a radio show for about 5 years between, middle school and high school. So by the time I graduated in high school, I was a communicator. So drawing and communication, boom, I went to graphic design. So I always say, like, I became a designer because of the radio, via radio, right? So those are little things. That's why when I created Cartel, this company 5 years ago, I wanted to bring all the components that I loved, in my career, and having a podcast, was one of them. So then when John Berglund, when we talked about how can we promote the Post building, I was like, well, we can have a podcast and talk about, what if we brand this space as a place for conversations and attract and discuss and start creating that vortex of communication through a podcast like this. So what about you, Caressa? Tell me about your upbringings and, what do you do today and how do you end up here?
Right. Well, I've always been a talker. So the only thing I ever got in trouble for in school was talking in class and being tardy to class. Not a lot has changed. But I have always kind of been interested in people and what makes people tick. And because in elementary school, I moved from the city to technically the county to St. Charles County in O'Fallon, I got to meet a lot of different people that make up this space. And again, always been very fascinated by that. So I got my degree in psychology, but I also have a love for theater. So I got a minor in theater. What do you do with that? You figure it out. So,
Right.
so I got a chance to utilize kind of all of those pieces in each of kind of the roles that I've gotten to do. So I've worked for most of our major theater companies across the city. I've worked for a lot of our other nonprofits. I worked in radio.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was going to be in architecture. So I've gotten to experience a bunch of different industries and spaces and ways that people communicate. And so that then has translated into me. I did social media for our tourism agency. I've done a lot of things and seen a lot of things. And I'm very fierce about, just because I'm considered young, I don't always see it that way, but I know that a lot of times I'm looked at as younger, but that doesn't mean I don't have experience. And so I've done a lot to support young professionals in our city and helping them also own their space, own their voice, and now working with youth to do the same thing. That, like, again, this is your city. Take up space here because there's plenty of space and opportunity for you to do so. And I'm just a champion for seeing people succeed, seeing people thrive, and very specifically that happening here because I know what our city has to offer. And obviously you all do too, because you came here and stayed for whatever reason that is. But you stayed here and we're building here.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that is in the physical space, whether that is in creating brands and helping build up businesses and companies, or working with people and helping to build them up. We are all seeing how we build this city together. And I think that, all of our little pieces, it's fun to see how they fit in.
I do love how we have different perspectives according to our upbringings. I'm an immigrant first. Not only came from a foreign country, I came from Cuba, which is the opposite of this country. I mean, technically it's back in the terrorist list because of supporting, exporting communist revolutions or whatever. So our countries have this tension, right? And I can go back home and I have a house there, and my father still lives in Cuba. But for me, St. Louis is home, and I would like to talk about why, the things you love about St. Louis. And this is my personal tribute and my gratitude. My second daughter is from here. Was the first Lucia. She's the first American in the family, so she's a St. Louisian, the first from both sides of the family.
Love that for her.
And I love the fact that St. Louis has this sense of permanence. In here, things are, you might think like things are stuck in time, or there's not a lot of dynamism like the one you can see in, New York, or Miami, or San Francisco. But in here, things are built to last, especially the built space, all the architecture and the public space, the parks, the institutions, and the philanthropy of St. Louis. So it seems like, when I look at St. Louis through a positive lens, and I'm very critical too of the negative things about the city that we're trying to work with. But I feel that this is a place that was built to stay. And that sense of that solidity, I don't know if that's a word in English, but it was always appealing. It feels as the big cities of the world. When I'm in Havana, it's a city that has its own character. Like when you go to New Orleans is unique, in the same way that St. Louis is unique. So there's a sense of authenticity, even in the conflicts that this city has. I see it as I define myself as an engaged outsider. So I'm an outsider, but I'm also 300% invested in, not only through my business, but through, this is my home, right? This is home. So sometimes even in the things that are broken and the things that need to be solved, I always say, God bless St. Louis for its unresolvedness, because the things that are not solved, they grant an opportunity for immigrants like me to come and say, hey, this is how I see it. So especially from the Hispanic perspective, from the Latino perspective, I sense the racial tension that we all know exists. But as a third culture, I have to say that St. Louis has been very welcoming to my perspective, and therefore granted opportunities to thrive. I've been here for almost 20 years now. So any thoughts about things you love?
I love many things about the city, but I do want to acknowledge what you shared about perspective. And as someone coming in not only from outside of the city, but outside of the country, and viewing the opportunity here, you see it. There are so many people that come from other parts of the country that come here and they see the opportunity. But for whatever reason, people here don't always get to see that opportunity. And they think that they have to leave in order to be successful. They think that they have to leave in order to experience things. And it's like, oh no, actually, if you just went to the other side of town, you might be able to experience exactly what you're looking for. And so I think that's one of the things that I love most about this city, is that you can have a bunch of different experiences right here with only traveling 10 minutes down the street.
Right.
And you can feel like you're in a totally different city. So being down in Bevo Mills feels very different than when you're on the north side. And being in Forest Park feels very different often than being downtown.
But somehow people are not willing to cross those silos.
And that comes from a lot of history and a lot of historic conflict and how things are set up. And I'm so fascinated by, again, the balance of all the things that we do, that in the build space, the way that the city is physically structured has kept people from crossing certain barriers and
Mhm.
boundaries. But then also how we've communicated that. I know that when my parents were younger, it was communicated to them that there were certain parts of town that they weren't allowed to go in. And so to this day, me and my peers kind of sometimes forget, oh yeah, that's part of our city too.
Mhm.
That's our city too. And I think the more that we look to build up the city and create new opportunities and things like that, we'll see some of that, those barriers kind of drop, but being able to still hold true to those identities. And so the hill will always be the hill, and more people will feel welcome in the hill.
Right.
And every other space, the city is made up of 79 different neighborhoods. There's a lot of
79 neighborhoods. Never thought about
79,
that.
Interesting.
which is awesome. But that means there are 79 different kind of identities that exist just in the city, not the
Mhm.
region, right? So we have so much to offer. And when I'm out and about and going to conferences and doing my thing in my day job and kind of all the other things that I've been able to do, my number one thing is we got space and opportunity. Whatever you want to experience in St. Louis, I promise you, I can help you find it. So just tell me, give me the things, and I'll say, oh yeah, you might want to try over here. Or have you heard of this organization there? You should get involved in this space. And I think that's the best thing about this place, is that there is something for everyone.
Love that. I
Yeah,
love
I think
that.
it's interesting. As you both were talking, it makes me reflect a little bit on the fact that, you know, sometimes it's, what's that phrase? You can't see the forest for the trees,
Yeah.
right? Like, so if you're in it, it's hard for you to get a sense of really all the richness that's around you. And if we extend that metaphor, the idea of a natural environment is never static.
No.
Nature is constantly on a continuum of change.
Yeah.
And it's calibrating our experiences related to that change and how we interpret it. Like, you could look at winter and be like, oh, this is horrible. Like, I can't take it, And you could apply that lens to an experience in any city.
Mm-hmm.
But after winter comes spring, right? Like, there's that moment where it gets bitter cold, but then it primes you for that transitional experience of spring.
Yeah.
And what that has to offer. And I think that's part of the thing that's present in me, particularly when I came, I'll say, as an outsider originally, like coming from a different state, and seeing here that there's a completely different canvas. It is grounded. There's a clear
Mhm.
history that you can rely upon to look at in terms of the collective stories that are told around and about St. Louis. But at the same time, it's on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
There's
is.
something there for everybody
Absolutely.
to find their place. You found it certainly in you coming here, Carlos, and growing your business. That 300% wedge that you have has everything to do with the commitments you've made, but it's the opportunity. And the interesting thing to me as well is that our culture and the climate right now is such that you can be here, raise a family, enjoy all of the wonderful experiences associated with that, and still be connected internationally.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I mean, I stayed in part because of the organizations that were here that provided professional development. I mean, I have to be somewhat selfish in that regard. But now I'm here in the Midwest and my reach is global. The projects that I work on are across the world. And as a result of that, there's a sense of empowerment there. But at the same time, I can bring back that sensibility here. When you have an experience outside of this environment, you come back, you appreciate the differences, just like the
Mhm.
seasonal changes. If you think
Mhm.
about all of this from a perspective of nature. And I think that's where I think a lot of the value of our community is. I don't know if you would think of this as well, Chris, but it's like, I've heard, because it's only anecdotal for me, that individuals that born and raised in St. Louis, they might go to college elsewhere or travel around, but when they raise a family, they come back to St. Louis.
Yeah.
We
Right?
call
And
it
it's a great
the
place.
boomerang effect.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, we refer to
That's
the
great.
city as, it's a boomerang city. So no matter how far you go, you will find your way back here in some way or another. And most of the
Yeah.
people, it is typically around that time of wanting to be close to family. And I think that's one of the other things I do love about the city, is that it's very familiar. People love to say that St. Louis is cliquey and it's hard to find your space. And I like to shift again that
Mhm.
phrase. And it's like, it's not that we're cliquey, but we're familiar. And we do need to figure out ways to work outside of that familiarity and welcome other people into it. But it's also one of the best things here because of the relationships and the connections and things like that that we have. We can move differently throughout our professional and personal career or spaces. Because if you need something, again, there's something for everybody. So if you need something, it's probably just a person away and ask away.
It's we in this conversation, I realized that Evan here was a business partner with someone that I bought a house from.
Yeah.
So he has technically has drinks in my kitchen, that was hilarious, by the way.
That's
But it's interesting how it is true that so we have all those 79 neighborhoods, right?
Mhm.
And the audience of this podcast is also people that are not from St. Louis, right? So we can be more specific, So I remember when I came here, I used to live in University City. Our family was in academia, so it was like the WashU bubble.
Mhm.
So everything happened there. I used to work for a design firm that was in the loop, and literally I didn't get out of there, that space. And then we discovered Lafayette Square, and I remember at the time my wife said, "Oh, but it's so far." And that was her expression, was like, far from what? And it was far from the WashU bubble. Because it was for the 2 years we lived there, we couldn't imagine ourselves getting out of that circle. And then my point was that, well, Lafayette Square is closer to the arch. So therefore it's closer to whatever the center of St. Louis is. So, but sometimes, and this is part of my work too, is like those shifts in the way we elaborate stereotypes. And we were like, okay, so we were in this, we couldn't imagine ourselves living out of what we knew. And the notion of having, and years pass, and yes, I lived in Lafayette Square, now I live in Clayton. So I'm thinking of moving actually to downtown to get close to, so I've been able to experience different neighborhoods and different vibes that definitely the city has. And as you mature in life, and, of course you need, when your kids are little, you need to be close by a park. When they go to college, maybe you want a loft and not a house. So, and all of those opportunities is that, St. Louis definitely has to offer all that, mobility. So I was just interesting about, any anecdotes about those, have you lived in different neighborhoods? Where do you guys live actually? What's your neighborhood?
Well, I like I said, when growing up, we started on the West Side, and my mom was from the West Side, and we moved into her childhood home. My dad's from U City. Then we were in the DSEG program, so I ended up going to school in Clayton and got a chance to get to know that neighborhood differently. And then when I was in 5th grade, we moved out to O'Fallon. So being able to see, again, many different parts of the region.
A lot of Latinos in
the area.
O'Fallon these days.
Yeah. Well, when I was out there, back in my day, there was less than 3% other, I believe was the stat. And that included Black, Latin, Asian, anybody that wasn't white. In many ways, it meant white Christian. And so that was a bit of a culture shock for me coming from Clayton, which is extremely diverse in all aspects. And, again, being in these different neighborhoods and the exposure that I got to all the different types of people, right? Now I live in the Gate District, which is right across the street from Lafayette Square. And I absolutely
South
love
City.
it.
That's
Yeah.
South. Okay,
It's South-ish. It's technically, I think, considered Midtown, but it's like Midtown before you get to the South.
Got it.
But in between 40 and 44. 64 for the Illinois people that are listening. But it's been such a eye-opener to be really in many ways, the heart of the city where so much is happening. And I'm so close to everything. So it's funny, you were saying that you are so far, but I'm like, man, once you have so much that's so close, I can see how it does.
Right.
U City does kind of feel far, because you got to kind of get on the high.
But
It's
technically,
a
it's
track.
just 15 minutes
It's
from one place to
nothing.
the next. It's nothing
Yeah, it's
compared
really
to
nothing.
other cities.
Exactly. And so I think when you're able to put that into perspective a little bit differently, it does change your experience and how you interact with the space. Before moving to the Gate, I lived in Grand Center, and I loved Grand Center. If I could have found a place to buy in Grand Center, I would have stayed. But that's been kind of, again, being able to be in what is now known nationally as one of the what is it? I can't remember what exactly Forbes called
It's
it,
the
but
number
it's like,
one. It's a emerging art district.
yeah, yeah.
Like number one art district or something like that.
Yeah,
in
and
the
as an
country.
artist, and I lived in the artist lofts, and being able to see that neighborhood build up, and all of the things that the different organizations that are building up that space, and now Telemundo's there, and we've
Right.
got all of these things that are happening in our city. My perspective of being able to kind of move around and see it from all angles has been really fun and shaping further my love for this city.
So what about you? Your neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I came out to Washington University, so I lived on Roseberry, like very close to the campus initially. But when I graduated and had a chance to start working, I moved to the Central West End. Like to me, that was like the
Beautiful
most
place.
walkable, urban. Like it was like New Jersey, like just that kind of feel for me.
And
that
amazing
vibe.
architecture as well.
Yeah.
So I like lived in an apartment above the retail on Euclid. I'm like living the life. This is great.
Life, right?
The firm that I started working for was downtown, but we were working on a project more remote right in the Central West End area. So I walked to work. I was like, I
Yep.
called my sister. I was like, I'm walking to work. Like this is amazing. And then we had light rail. So like again, growing up in New Jersey, like we would go to New Brunswick, drop off your car, take the train into Manhattan. You're there in 55 minutes, and you can everything Manhattan had to offer, and then hop on the train, come back. So like even when I finished that project and started working downtown, I just took the light rail, and it was like walk to the train station, go downtown, come back up, and that to me was the most connected I had felt because it was very much a piece of home for me. That kind of experience, that urban experience, and so that's really was like the main neighborhood for me, and I stayed there for many years. And then when I met the young lady that became my wife, we started thinking about I think we moved to Richmond Heights next. We were in a duplex there. And right now we live in Kirkwood. So our family's in Kirkwood. And that's right along one of those railway lines that one of the emergent railway lines that were basically 19th century kind of component between Glendale, Webster, and Kirkwood. And we live in a Harris Armstrong house. So if anybody is facile with architectural history,
Nice.
Harris Armstrong is a modernist that homegrown St. Louis, a runner-up to the Arch Ground competition. So just living in a house designed by an architect, particularly someone of that stature, in just a run-of-the-mill Midwestern community, it's pretty
cool.
neat. So when I found that house, we had to move there. It's like one of those things where I likely could have easily gravitated back to the city, but when you're in a house that's like this, it just you connect with it in other ways too that have value. Yeah. And then in Kirkwood, if you don't mind my saying, it's like it's a very walkable neighborhood there. To me, that was like that next layer of like I always joke and say it's like a Norman Rockwell painting there because they have a farmer's market in the center of town. The train station is right there. It's a classic Richardsonian type architecture. And then there's a really robust kind of network of businesses that are there. And they do a lot of community-based activity. So it's like, again, another wonderful connection of an experience. And I think that's one thing that I think is, while not necessarily distinct about St. Louis, is something that's valued about it, is all of those layers.
Yeah.
There's a time and place for all different things. You mentioned it just a moment ago, Carlos, about you might want a loft, you might want, a home or an apartment or something, depending on the stage in life that you're in. And I found that that's the case here in St. Louis, that you can find your space. And in many respects, like when you started off talking about the work that you're doing now and working with individuals and organizations that are shaping the narrative, I think that's one of the things that's common with us is that we're all in the business of the contours of a story, whether it's a story that you're helping relay and express through graphic design, about branding and how a business can evolve and develop, how it can see itself, and then how it can communicate who it is and its identity. Same for me, obviously, as an architect, listening to the challenges, the friction points that an organization might experience and feel, and then finding avenues to grow and find them physical space to do that in, but also how can they be strategic about the programming. There's all these different layers of where we have that that phrase, that lens on ourselves about who we are and what our identity is, and then does the environment match that?
Yeah.
And I think when we see those alignments, that's where we feel enriched. And it's not to say that you're looking for a monolithic experience. It just means that you connect in various ways, culturally and otherwise. And I think that's something for me that I take away, because I haven't necessarily lived and touched all these different communities. I've spent time, in Lafayette Square at some restaurants there, and have loved the experience and richness there. The Hill, like you mentioned earlier, can't beat it, right? Like if I can't be in New York, I might as well just be there to have a pizza. Right?
Yeah. So, I really love the fact that, that we have very different perspectives, and I really look forward to see, our next guest. And I mean, we're going to have individual episodes. So for the audience, each of us will have episodes with their own guests. So we're not going to be together like this. So this is our first, recorded session to kind of like, put our hopes for what season 3, might bring. But I think it will be interesting to, 10 episodes from now to recap and see, what have we learned from it, and how our expectations were, if they were met or if there were surprises in, along the way. I just love the fact that, if we're going to create a product like Inside City, I love the plurality of opinions, and not only through the guest, but also through the host, because we all see St. Louis in different ways. So yeah, Jewish guy, African-American lady, and a Cuban gentleman walked into a podcast. So that's, I think, what Inside City is all about, having those different perspectives. So any hopes that we have, because, I've been watching and producing the 20 episodes before this one. So I have an idea of what things, how things are going to pan out. But what about you? What are you hoping? What do you expect from Inside City?
Well, for me, I am really hopeful to truly be able to create a space where we are giving people insight to the city, right? That it's not just through these, like, many of the people that I'll be talking to, these very specific outlets of communication and how the narrative is being shaped, but really being able to talk to real people and get their perspective and opinions about the city and how they are experiencing it. Because no matter what professions we're in, we are also citizens. We also go here, and we're all experiencing this place in a unique way. And so being able to bring that to the table and get people to think. I don't want it to just be reporting news. Like, I don't want it to just be information spewing, but where people can really be insightful and consider what all is here to offer, and then choose to experience the city maybe in a way that they hadn't before.
Nice.
Yeah. What I'm excited about this forum, this platform, is the conversations that we can have, right? I mean, I think so much of what we're talking about is engagement. It's learning from one another, providing opportunities for an extended audience to have a conversation. What I love about even just today, it's like the three of us having a conversation. Yeah. But at the same time,
this was not a script at all.
Yeah. The individuals that find interest in our conversation get a window into what's of interest for all of us. And I'm hopeful that I can create a forum where there can be an open exchange of ideas. One of the things that's distinctive about architecture as an art form is that it's drawing with intention. Mm-hmm. So it's like when we pick up the pen, it's not whatever whims emerge. There's intentionality to it. And I think that's an important aspect of how many of us approach life, is that we want to be intentional about the steps that we make, the decisions that we make, so that we're moving forward. And I'm just hoping in a simple way that the insights that accumulate as part of the conversations we collectively have with our guests bring forward those perspectives.
Yeah. So here at Cartel, the firm that produces this podcast, we believe in, simplify, clarify, and amplify. Those are the 3 principles that we live by. And we always say that everything starts with a conversation. Nothing will ever change. Nothing will ever be, affected if people are not able to lock eyes and exchange ideas. So with that, this is what I'm hoping for this space. Open the forum to bring, all sorts of perspectives, even the ones that we don't, we might not share. But I think it will be, to have a productive, conversation about the future of St. Louis and how we see it since we're here. So with that, I love you guys. I think this is going to be a very interesting, look forward to what this season will bring to us. And I have a lot of, I feel good about this.
Yeah.
I feel this is going to be like an interesting, journey moving forward.
I would agree. I'm excited.
Yeah,
Cool.
likewise. Thank you
Awesome.
very much.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
great.
us.